Hello and welcome to another episode of SNEED-CAST. I am Quinton. I am the executive producer and sometimes host, which is what I did today with Ken whenever we talked to Chelsie Spencer. Chelsie was on one of our episodes back in February, and with recent things going on within Texas and the THC and hemp space there, we wanted to have her back on. Chelsie went to law school at Miami, and she's also a founding partner at Ritter Spencer Chang. She has been recognized as a super lawyer in the cannabis space by Thomas Reuters, and she even has her own THC drink brand called Revolutionary Apothecary. We wanted to have her back on given Governor Abbott's recent veto of SB 3, which was the bill that was going to ban hemp in the state of Texas. And we just wanted to see what the vibe was and what we can expect coming out of this special session this week. Please enjoy this conversation and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
Chelsie, I just kind of want you to give us like an update of what happened within the past month since we talked.
Absolutely. So it's interesting you use the phrasing "shocked us all" because even I was shocked. Um, Coming out of session, I was actually in England. I assist on drafting these bills, and I was in England visiting family, and my phone started just absolutely blowing up, and I was looked down, and I'm like, "What is happening in the state of Texas?" Because it's clients, it's people in the legislature, it's lobbyists. Quickly figured out that while I was gone, the committee substitute for SB 3, CSSB 3, which was the leading fix bill. It was the 123 or 124 page bill that had a lot of regulatory fixes in there. It did certain things like moving hemp beverages over to the Texas Alcoholic Beverage Commission and a few other items. It was tossed completely out, and back came the ban bill that Patrick was so insistent, excuse me, our Lieutenant Governor Patrick was so insistent on getting, and he had the votes. And, I know we had that conversation back in February, and it was doom and gloom because I think I used the expression then, and if I didn't, I use it routinely. Our lieutenant governor plays chess while we all play checkers. He's very skilled at navigating session and getting his stated policy goals achieved. So the ban bill passed out, and immediately the hemp industry reacted, attempting to persuade Governor Abbott to issue a veto. And what I have often said is that, the state of Texas has like an $88 million plus surplus. They don't care about the loss of money. They don't care about the loss of jobs. They don't care about the leases that are lost. They don't care that this is a large industry with value. So during the time period up until the veto, which, if I recall, is June 22nd, if I'm off a day or two, I had a major
Literally.
car accident just 2 weeks ago. So while we were waiting, the first 2 weeks, I was fairly confident that he was going to sign this into law, with the caveat, Governor Abbott is a accomplished jurist, excuse me, and he would have been well aware that certain portions of that ban were very subject to litigation, particularly some of the criminal measures that potentially violate interstate commerce clause and some potential other measures. So I actually felt for him because he was in a real catch-22. He was either forced to sign a bad bill into law or not do anything and let the status quo continue when his lieutenant governor is chunking cereal, THC cereal, at reporters on TV and calling the hemp industry terrorist. And, he's on TV saying, "This kills your children." And I'd like to address that point, but back to the veto
I think
story. Um,
go ahead, Quinton.
at the 19th
Yeah,
hour, a
yeah,
savior
exactly.
came
There
in
was a
that
lot of shock. I think I told
literally,
Quinton
and I
the
could
morning that
never
Monday
have
morning after he
fathomed
signed it.
that this would
I saw
be
it at
the saving
5:45 in the
grace of
morning or
the hemp
something. I got to the
industry.
office,
So
turned on the computer, and read the
conservative
headline, and
media
I
outlets
literally
started
yelped
picking this up.
loudly in the office by
The
myself
Joe
and
Rogan show,
started
it came
dancing,
up naturally with a
embarrassingly,
guest the
and just was
Saturday
excited. Yeah,
preceding his veto, the last week of his veto period. There was another conservative commentator, I think their name is Shawnee Hayes, and the ball just started rolling. Conservative voices started picking this up, saying, "Hey, we're the party of personal liberty here, and you're trying to come into our home and ban an entire substance that now many of your average consumers have
yeah.
gotten used to. It's on the shelf at
I
toy
was
lines, on the
super excited, and that
shelf at Specs. It's in certain grocery stores here in Texas." So that is what really ended up pushing the needle here. The Texas Hemp Business Council delivered 150,000 petition signatures to the governor. That in itself was a massive, massive effort. and things like that are probative, and he looks at them. But those conservative media voices decrying their own party, I think, really influenced him into signing the veto here.
I'm curious. That's one of my biggest questions for you is, what are you expecting to see out of the special session, and what are they ultimately gonna end up coming through, and how is Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick going to, what is his influence and impact on the special session going to be? He came out, was very public.
I'd really like to start with framing the conversation, because one thing that I cannot stand hearing, there are a lot of out of state entities and lobbyists and media who keep saying Texas needs regulations, Texas needs regulations. We have regulations. And it's really irked me that in those press conferences that you mentioned, Ken, I've not seen our media push back on Lieutenant Governor Patrick with, frankly, some of the really salacious accusations that he's made. We do have fairly robust regulations here, including testing requirements. We, in fact, are one of the only states that require microbial testing on our hemp products out of the 50 state regime and those that have permissible regimes. We do have regulation by dishes. Should it be stronger? Absolutely. No one is arguing that tenet. But I'm very tired of seeing and hearing media quotes where people are saying we need regulations here in Texas. We have them. We need to tighten them up. The second thing is I don't understand why our media here in Texas is not pushing against him when he is doing these press conferences calling the those in this industry terrorists. I'm not a terrorist. I don't kill children. I own my own hemp beverage company, RA. Um, I'm not out there killing children. And no one has even pushed back on the fact that in the entire recorded history of cannabis usage, which goes back thousands of years to the ancient Chinese, we don't have one single recorded incident of a death attributable solely to cannabis usage. It is a scientific impossibility. Now, you might end up in the hospital with psychosis for a very long time, but it's not going to kill you. And these are the facts that I am hoping resound loudly to our legislature as we enter this special session. Because when we make legislation as a state, if we start with malinformed legislators, then we're going to end up with terrible legislation. So, yes, Patrick is, yeah, garbage in, garbage out. And they are getting a lot of garbage in. There are a lot of out of state actors at play here who like to come in and boast that they've taken credit for the veto and a lot of other things, and frankly it ends up causing more issues that impact the legislation coming out here. But yes, Lieutenant Governor Patrick is going to take an extremely active role in this special session. As you said, Ken, he has said it publicly on TV. He's not happy with Abbott, accused him basically of turning Texas into a drug den and a recreational state. So, as we discussed last time, the lieutenant governor has vast control over the Senate, vast control. And I would not have been so worried. I would have told you about 2 weeks ago that he had lost some of his sway. However, with the recent flooding here in Texas, there are going to be senators and representatives who need aid from the state, who are very dependent on executive leadership right now. And listeners would probably say, well, that would be absolutely terrible that he would use that as any form of leverage. Well, he's done it historically many, many times. The only two possible scenarios are we get CSSB3 or some version of it back on the floor with the stated policy goals of the governor that we can go through, and that passes out. The other option is that the lieutenant governor has the votes that he already had. He had them in May. It's very possible he can get them again. And we come out with another ban bill that puts Abbott in a very tenuous position of, do I really put my foot down here and call another special session on this hemp issue alone? I don't think that he will. We got very lucky that there were about 4 other corollary issues that he put into special session with this. Or do I sign it into law knowing that litigation is forthcoming and we end up with the status quo again? And he's keenly aware. We talked about this in February. It was a failure of the state of Texas. We have no age restrictions on sale for highly intoxicating hemp products here in Texas. So he knows if we come out with a ban and I sign and we get litigation and the litigant obtains an injunction, I've got possibly another 1 to 2 year period where people continue to sell these products to high school kids. And that is, it's no dirty little secret here in Texas. We've seen the raids that were spurred. I think we talked about last time how one was spurred by the Allen School Resource Officer in Allen, Texas, because they had so many teenagers ingesting THC products on campus. So those are only two possible outcomes. We're coming out with a ban, or we're coming out with regulations, stricter regulations. I, for one, hope that we can come out with reasonable regulations that help foster a robust, growing industry here in Texas.
At the risk of sounding dumb, because you've mentioned the lawsuits that would happen, and then Abbott said so himself. I believe he mentioned Arkansas, and that they are being sued, sued right now. So, like, at the risk of sounding dumb, what are these lawsuits centering around, and how is it being effective for essentially kind of stopping these things from going into?
Well, that's the rub, because largely they're
a law?
not effective. Originally, they were. There was one here in Texas that challenged the Delta 8 provision. I think we even talked about last time. I disagree with the merits on that. I do think they will lose at the Texas Supreme Court. It can be very easy to obtain injunctive relief at a lower court when the lower court is very unfamiliar with the subject matter. We're all talking at a requisite level here where we know what a cannabinoid is. Everyone on this phone call probably knows Delta 8 is a semisynthetic. They know it's created from isomerization. Now imagine you are a trial court judge. You don't even know the distinction between hemp and cannabis. You've never heard the word cannabinoid, and you have a bunch of lawyers coming in and on the record telling you Delta 8 comes directly out of the plant. Here's the definition, and sort of hiding the ball that no one on the market is selling Delta 8 that is extracted directly from the plant. That's a prime example of how injunctive relief can be obtained in a lot of these cases. But the reason I say by and large they're failing is originally we started seeing people rely on the interstate commerce clause to challenge this. Now, if the statute has a criminal component, like with, I believe it was Indiana and the Seventh Circuit, you have a very good chance because that would penalize an interstate traveler coming through your state. Let's say Texas did pass the ban and we did have criminal provisions in there. Somebody's over in Louisiana, buys a legal hemp product there and drives through Texas, and boom, there you go. You're getting charged with a criminal element. That is a problem because the 2018 Farm Bill says that no state can interfere with the lawful transport of hemp. Now, what a lot of courts are starting to realize is the 2018 Farm Bill says not anything about hemp derived products. It simply says FDA go regulate these things. As we talked about last time, the FDA said they believe these products are illegal. So when people are asking these federal courts for relief, we're by and large starting to see the federal courts push back and say, the Farm Bill set the floor here. The state gets to set the ceiling. So if a state wanted to completely criminalize or make some form of a hemp product illegal, it is completely their prerogative to do so. And we've seen that in states that have chosen to ban, for example, smokable hemp while still permitting other products. So Governor Abbott, again, he accomplished jurist there. He's very, very aware of these issues. And there was a lawsuit filed that preemptively jumped the gun. I mean, you have no cause of action until a bill is signed into law. I was frankly, the legal community had a laugh at that lawsuit. But you don't file a lawsuit before the bill is signed into law. There's no cause of action. It's a moot point, to use a legal term. The court couldn't have reviewed that. But they did that, I think, as a publicity stunt. And Abbott was smart enough to put it in his proclamation and pretend that oh, well, there's already been this one filed. I assure you, Governor Abbott was not remotely concerned about that lawsuit. He's not necessarily concerned about litigation for stalling this. The state is sued every day in multiple counties. That's why we have a whole attorneys general offices staffed with staff attorneys to handle these cases. So they're not scared by the threat of litigation. But if the ban had passed, one of my major concerns here was I had clients who were very interested in litigating, and we had started those conversations while we waited to see what Governor Abbott did. And I had vast concerns that there was no claim here. This was very different than the standard hemp challenge lawsuit in that we weren't facing an emergency regulation. We weren't facing a regulatory rule. We weren't facing some type of executive order from the government. This was a bill passed by our bicameral legislature, both houses, and voted out by people's house and the Senate. And that's exactly what American democracy is supposed to be, two houses coming together. Now we know from polling people didn't support this, but it was still going to be an actual bill signed into law. So it would have been difficult to challenge, particularly under a federal challenge here. I saw a news story, and I can't for the life of me remember the particular representative's name right now, but he was in either Amarillo or Lubbock, and the news was featuring him in a story where he walked into one of these shops. He didn't know what hemp was, but he wanted to educate himself before this special session. So he sought out a retail store in his district, walked in, stayed there for a fairly substantial amount of time, and directly spoke with the owner and the employee behind the counter and was asking them questions. And one of the questions that they featured in the news story is he said, well, what does this 0.3 mean here on the label? And so I was really heartened to see that. And I hope that other representatives and senators have taken this time, particularly in light of Governor Abbott's proclamation saying, this is a terrible idea to ban all of this. We need to tighten up our regulations. So it is my hope that more of them are taking this time to educate themselves on the matter. It is nigh impossible for me to tell you sitting today without the benefit of being in the special session right now, whether we have the votes.
So you kind of you hinted at it earlier, calling the industry a bunch of terrorists, and that
Yeah.
that you're all money launderers for the cartels, and however else he phrased it. But it's nothing could be further from the truth. If there's one group of people that want an outright ban, it's the cartels. And so that's what really irks me is that you can sit here and have your proclamations about public safety and protecting children, and I understand those concerns. I have children myself. I have a son in college and a daughter that's starting junior high. So all valid concerns. I don't think any of us dismiss any of those, but you can't. It's just the same one thing that's just it doesn't align with the facts because you ban this, and that's exactly what the cartels want. You got high schools that are full of THC products. That's not going to change anything. They're still going to get their THC products, and then they're going to get them off the streets and through the cartel channels, and so that's really one that really just kind of stuck in my craw when I see him make those types of proclamations. And again, to not have any kind of pushback, it's one thing I hadn't really thought much of because the media, they just kind of did not very many pointed questions, not very much
Exactly.
coverage of saying like a lot of this is, and I don't know if that's just a lot of the media getting, they've been whipped pretty good by the the current federal administration and President Trump, and I wonder if maybe some of them are just starting to get more fearful and they just aren't emboldened enough to speak up. Who knows? But it's very
I
frustrating.
mean, if someone throws a bag of cereal at me and says, "Are you stupid? Would you eat this?" Maybe I'm spicy, but I would have said, "Yeah, these look great. Love to try them. Thanks." Like
I can't believe
you're not
someone
gonna
didn't
die.
say like, "Oh yeah, I'll eat them right now," because it wouldn't have been a big deal. And that's why, and that goes to the point of like the well is so poisoned here. It's like he's talking like you're gonna die if you eat a bag full of those things. And grant like or like you said, you might go into psychosis or something. And I mean, and even to touch on that, like Abbott talks about how there was a kid who he took a bunch of edibles and then he shot his mom and sister. And to me, I think there's a lot of space on the page between him taking the
100%.
gummies and then him shooting his family members. I feel like there's a lot more to that than just weed. And I know that's a spicy headline, but it's just to me the well is so poisoned. And even going into the or what Abbott said that he would want to do, there's a line in here that says that products must not be made, packaged, or 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 advertised in a way or or in a way that that is attractive to kids. How do you like? Is there going to be a panel that looks at packages? I mean, and I know that like, and not to cut you off, but like I know that they don't want the like
illegal.
nerd
That's trademark infringement.
gummy clusters that have. Yeah, and exactly. And so to me, it's like any issues of that would be solved by trademark. So it's like, would there be a panel that would say, no, this looks too much like kids, or how would that even work?
When we say statutory, I mean in the bill itself. So the way legislation works is we pass a bill and the bill will designate an agency to oversee and implement that bill. So we will get a bill that will say, for example, you cannot put animals or anthropomorphic characterizations on the packaging. It will then direct the relevant agency, as of right now it's Dishes, to adopt rules reflecting the intent of that statute. So Dishes would then sit down, and this is Texas, so we're not going to leave it broad. It's not just going to say don't put things that are attractive to children. It's going to have finite guidelines. And frankly, I am not in favor of those prohibitions. There are alcohol products now that are made with, somebody posted a photo the other day. It's a collaboration between Sunny Delight and one of the alcohol industry conglomerates, and a child is way more apt to pick that up and open it. It was in a can, easily openable. Well, I should say they're just as likely to pick that up as they are hemp product, but you don't see those regulations impacting that particular category here. I do think it is absolutely imperative that we keep children out of these products, unless they are within a prescribed medical regime and overseen by a physician. For example, the young male that you mentioned, it is no secret, it is clinically proven. There is a ton of evidence. Cannabis can cause events of psychosis, particularly in young males when they take exceedingly large doses. What the lieutenant governor and the governor are not saying about those incidents is, typically, I saw one of the mothers on the floor of the, I believe it was the Senate at that point, testifying. Her son had bought a 2,500 milligram vape. That would send me to the hospital. Nobody should be selling a 2,500 milligram single use vape. And to your point, Ken, that this industry is not filled with terrorists. It's not filled with cartel members. It's filled with people who are trying to do the right thing. And I'll do a personal example right here, because I know that my beverage bottle was shown to certain members of the Capitol, because I'm going to grab it and do a live example here. One of the things that I am adamant that we do at our company, because our beverage, in my opinion, tastes quite good. It tastes like a juice. It's not repulsive to put in your mouth. I was very adamant that, even though it is not required in the majority of states, that we put on a child resistant topper. So we actually went with pharmaceutical grade caps here that you actually push down like a prescription medication, because I don't want someone's kid drinking this. That, to me, is an example of a reasonable regulation, whereas saying entire hemp
Absolutely. And
industry,
also on that
you
point, the
can't
example
put
Quinton
an
you used to
animal
that,
on
that
your product
unfortunate
like an
incident with that
armadillo.
gentleman who
That's
killed his family
asinine to
members.
me, when I can walk
You know,
into
I
Total
find it
Wine
quite
and see
hypocritical and
400
ironic
plus
that the
alcohol brands
Republican
doing the
politicians
exact
will
same thing.
use that to try to ban a substance when they get bent out of shape when the left and the progressives and the Democratic Party uses the same storyline or the same instance to try to prohibit or ban or regulate firearms. Because you could just as easily take that same exact story and then have, Democratic politicians using that as a reason why, there need to be stricter firearm regulations or bans outright. So it's like talking out of both sides of your mouth, and it gets quite frustrating. But I mean, of course, that's to be
It's
expected from
true.
politicians. So, um,
It's a lot of grandstanding going on here. And one thing I appreciate is, here's an example. There are some ladies down in Austin, Texas, who own a really awesome retail shop. It's called Mary J. And I happened to be speaking with one of them the other day, and she said she was standing in line at the post office, and this older woman just happened to ask her, "What are you doing mailing all these packages?" And she told her, "I am a cannabis retail store owner here in Texas, or hemp retail store owner." And the lady said, "Oh, well, I saw a news story about that. I hope all of that passes and you get shut down." And instead of reacting, angrily and getting in an argument with this lady, um, the owner took a minute and, said, "Ma'am, here's my story." And she has some very personal issues of why she went into into hemp, which a lot of people do. They had a parent who had cancer. They learned about it through someone who was on end of life or palliative care. And she sat and spoke with that lady at the post office. She said she talked to her for a pretty decent amount of time and explained to her, these are what most of my customers are looking for. They're not coming in trying to get
yeah,
blazed out of their mind. It's veterans who are having episodic events of PTSD. It's people with cancer who can't eat, and these things give them an appetite. And she said towards the end of the conversation, the lady actually said, well, now that I understand, I hope it doesn't pass for y'all. And I think if more people sat down and had these conversations and really tried to start educating some of these people
Yeah.
who, because, frankly, it's not our fault. I grew up in the age of prohibition. You guys grew up in the age of prohibition. We all saw those commercials on Saturday saying, this is your brain on pot. Here, the one with the girl stuck to the couch and she's not moving. And her friend's like, this is all she does now that she found cannabis. It's people tend to believe that. And we actually heard our lieutenant governor spewing what has been a refuted theory, the gateway theory, that cannabis is the gateway into all other drugs. That came from Henry Anslinger back in the 30s and 40s, where he took violent crimes, pulled the files, and if the person had had cannabis or any
Oh,
mention of cannabis in the file, he
100%.
pulled the file and said, oh, well, they violently murdered 13 people because of cannabis.
Like, I know your answer, but there's no reflection from him on this, because it's just so insane to me that like every media thing has come out against him on this, and it seems like a real split of the GOP in some way. So it just blows my mind in ways. But it is wild to me about how
If
much
you're on
pushback
television
he
calling
got
people
on it,
terrorists and throwing
just in
cereal at
general.
reporters, it it would I would feel less for the pushback if we could engage in an honest conversation. If our lieutenant governor had used his press conference time surrounded by a myriad of law enforcement to say, look, we have regulations here in the state of Texas. We've had them for 6 years. We need to tighten them up. I'm concerned about children accessing these products. Why he's so concerned about adults accessing these products when they're making a knowing choice, I'll set that aside. But if we could start there, then we could have an honest conversation. But instead, he's on TV telling the constituents of Texas that cannabis kills people, that these organizations are run by the cartel and it's terrorists who want to kill your children. And, would you eat this product that came from Hometown Hero that contains a QR code on that very bag of cereal bits that he threw at the reporter, that leads the consumer directly to a cannabinoid potency profile that oftentimes comes from a DEA registered lab, analytical lab, who's very skilled in doing cannabinoid potency profile testing, heavy metal testing, pesticide testing. And here in Texas, what they're also failing to mention, though the FDA has said these products are illegal at the federal level, meaning to sell these products in interstate commerce, you don't have to have an ingredient listing. You don't have to disclose nutritional facts because the FDA is saying you can't sell it, period. So they're not going to cite you for failing to include an ingredient list. Well, here in Texas, we classified edible hemp products as a food, and we require our hemp industry manufacturers to
One
follow
other
our
angle
food
too, I think
statute,
that's a part of this calculation. I
which,
spoke to some
guess
of
what,
my friends and
mimics
colleagues about as
FDA
well,
law,
though,
requires
is I think,
ingredient listing
of
and
course, I don't
weight-based
think
descending
it was
order,
in Governor Abbott's
requires
statement or
disclosure of
proclamation,
nutritional
but
facts,
I think there's a
requires
little bit of a
mandatory
political
allergen
calculus
labeling and
because I think
food safety
that an
protocols.
outright ban,
If
and I
you
know this is
watched his
just
press
purely me
conferences,
hypothesizing
you would
from
never know
about
any of
politics, but I
this.
think an
And that
outright
to me is
ban
so
could have cost them at the ballot box.
disingenuine. We can't
And I
come
think
up
Governor
with
Abbott factored that in
tightening
because
up
I
our
think also
regulations when
the
one
voting
of the
populace,
heads of our state is on
learned a lot
television
throughout
telling
the
a blatant
pandemic,
lie
one
that
way or
we
the
don't
other,
have
good or
any to
bad.
begin
But
with.
like there was a lot of distrust for elected officials and things these days, and people are getting smarter about fact checking on their own and finding their own information and being outright lied to. I think the voters out there, especially when you saw these conservative voices, like you said, in the media and the typical voting blocks like veterans and things that typically lockstep vote for Republicans, an outright ban I think could have had a really negative effect on the ballot box for the Republican Party in the state of Texas. I told my friends, I was like, Governor, I never thought in a million years I would say this, but Governor Abbott, it might be my first vote if he vetoes this and protects this industry. That's how much of a single issue voter I might be. But so I think again, it's just me hypothesizing, but I think that at least played some part of the calculus in his decision to veto it. And I'm hoping also that you mentioned the one House representative that's going out into their district and talking to the businesses and learning, and hopefully they're hearing from their constituents as well that are saying we don't want this. And like you said, I mean the polling is there. The media. I think all of us in the industry we know like nobody out there actually wants a ban. And so hopefully they'll take that into consideration and actually try to enact the will of the people. But of course, that's maybe just me being a little bit too optimistic about what politicians are going to be doing. But we'll see.
Well, they're well aware that their constituents don't want this. In fact, there was some internal polling done during the veto period that showed that conservatives were in favor of this. But this is also why I, again, use the oft repeated phrase that the lieutenant governor is playing chess while we're all playing checkers, because historically he has been very opposed to expansion of our medical cannabis program here in Texas. He has never allowed smokable products. He has been very clear they would have no place in the medical program. In his plight to pass the ban in SB3, he learned and heard from the veterans contingent that for example, PTSD, when a veteran is having an episodic event, immediate efficacy is very important. They can't wait 45 minutes for a gummy to kick in. So they came out in droves. We saw, VFW leadership and everything saying you can't take away access to these products. So he threw them a bone in the medical program by finally caving in on pulmonary inhalation mechanisms. So, and for the first time in my life, I saw Lieutenant Governor send a tweet about the medical program. I nearly fell out of my chair when somebody sent it to me. The press was starting to pick up on the ban and the fact that he was pushing for it. So he went over on X and said, it was something like, to the veterans, I'm still gonna protect you. We're expanding medical or da da da. And that's why I say he's playing checkers. He was very aware he was going to push back. So he said, well, let me come off of this very staunch prohibition that I've been against and get them over to the medical program, and that may appease them. I think that backfired for him. There are some, the veterans have expressed some issues that they have with our medical program, and so it wasn't quite the appeasement that he thought it would be. But that's a perfect example of why I say he is playing chess while the rest of us play checkers. But I'm hoping has been enough pushback, that there's been sufficient time for some of these representatives and senators who had to rush a vote. And people need to understand, like, Texas meets biennially. Our legislators all have full-time jobs. Some of them are attorneys. They work, and they're there in Austin for 5 months, and then now they're being called back for a special session. They're presented with thousands of bills and topics they need to get up to speed on. I'm going to be real honest with you. I don't know what we're going to come out of this special session with. I really don't. The hope of the whole hemp industry, I think, is that we see just some tightening up and cleaning up of our existing regulatory regime, but particularly age gating on some of these products and things like milligram caps. I saw somebody who it was a product shown to be, had 10,000 milligrams in the product. Who is doing this? Those are the people who are taking the limelight. That's not the industry. 99% of the industry really cares about the products that they're putting into their consumers' bodies. And it's that 1% who are really towing the line here and poking that bear, who are leading to these repercussions for everyone else.
Yep. And I do believe also the hemp roundtable, who you mentioned earlier, and others have, if some people are hesitant, they don't know how to write an email or whatnot. I do believe they have templates and things available too on their website, so folks can go look at and they can use that.
It sends it for you. You can go to Hemp Roundtable and put your name and email address in, and it has it drafted and will send it on your behalf.